Welcome. Maraudon and Sunken Temple are not very popular dungeons compared to some of the others in this series. Many people will do these for quests in order to justify the time spent here. In my Prot Paladin overview, I recommended running Maraudon for weapons like Fist of Stone and Thrashblade, as well as Hypertech Buckler off the Goblin boss. That being said, you can see here I'm using Floriax instead. I managed to pick up the first one I saw in the auction house early on for 100 gold, because on the Lion side there's far less interest in this weapon, as it's pretty much just something that Prot Paladins would be interested in. Orc Warriors like this as an offhand weapon, but many people don't even know about the neutral auction house to begin with. This weapon is currently best in slot at level 60. Of course, there is room for number crunching to change that, but right now nothing else feels close. Even Iron Foe has been mathed out to not be a very good proc rate, which means that this could win out in the end. So if you can get your hands on one of these early on, it's going to be more than worth it, even at a 200 to 250 gold price point. Anyway, enough about that. Let's talk about Orange side of Mara. For fun, let's start with a bad pull. See if you can spot all the mistakes that I make here. Now, the Constrictor Vine mobs are not too painful to deal with. You can group up quite a bit of them as long as there's not a barbed lasher in the way. That being said, you do have to be, a little bit tactful about it, unlike me. And for the most part, the only thing you really have to worry about is if they root you in place. Just make sure you have Blessing of Freedom at the ready for that. You can see I'm getting a lot of debuffs here from those small maggots. Now, I should be using Stone Form to get rid of that. Makes it a lot easier. You can actually just use that to straight up prevent it from happening. Of course, if you're a human, you're SOL on that one. You're going to have to just kite away from them or dispel really quickly. Also, it helps to remember your keybinds. And here's another bad pull, but for a different reason. This time, it's actually not my fault. How great. Sort of. See, for some reason, people really don't like to let you bubble pull. Obviously, that's anecdotal, but I've completely given up on bubble pulling at this point for the most part. It is just, the effort-reward ratio is awful. Someone always will cast something, they'll buff somebody, or even they'll just get too close and get proximity aggro, because people really are not used to that one. Especially if they've been playing on private servers where that's way less of an issue. In fact, I never really even noticed it on private servers. But now, if you get close to someone who has a bubble or any immune effect up, the mob's just going to look at you instead. Now, the first boss in here, Noxion, is actually pretty rough. Maybe it's just because I've been spoiling myself by playing with mages all the time, and he's probably immune to frost. Not actually sure. But he hits kind of hard, and yeah, it's just not as great a fight as I thought it was going to be running into it. You can see here, we're actually on level with him, and he's still just trucking me, really. So even though I don't normally talk about bosses too much, just keep that in mind. This guy might throw you for a loop. Be ready to have a cooldown or some kind of potion or something if, your healer is not top notch here. This healer in particular, I think we just met, so I didn't know too much about him. And that's another thing you really need to take into account is knowing your group. Can you rely on people to do certain things? And another interesting thing is I never realized that I was crutching on an add-on called Heal Calm, which actually tells you on your portrait frames how much you're about to be healed for, as long as both you and your healer have that add-on. So I definitely highly recommend you at least get it, and then hope that the healers that you group with have it so that you have more information to work with. Now, you can see on these pulls, I'm trying to group up as many mobs as possible here. It's not because I'm trying to be pragmatic or farm XP in some efficient manner. It's just because I hate Orange side of Maraudon a lot. These barbed lasher mobs, in particular, will stun you quite frequently. There's a lot of them in here. It's just very tedious. So, in this case, I just kind of messed up this pull because I got a little too frisky. I'm like, man, let's just get through this. We're so close to being done. Now, see here, I actually have a grenade off cooldown on my bar, and I easily could have chucked it there onto those two mobs, made this pull like 10 times easier. Instead, I was being stingy, had to bubble down all the way at the last possible second. In fact, I probably cut that a little too close because with spell batching and the possibility of being crit, I easily could have died right there, but I do usually like to wait until the last second to use my cooldowns, which yet again, with Heal Calm, makes it a little easier to avoid having to do that. So now that we're finally out of Orange side, we still have more of these to deal with. Fantastic. There's at least 2 more pulls outside of the actual Orange entrance. So what I'm going to do is just yet again do basically the exact same pull as last time, but now I'm a little more level-headed and I'm just going to, do it properly. Which basically amounts to pray the stun doesn't kill me, use Blessing of Freedom, kite as appropriate. You know what the rest of this pole looks like, so I'll spare you. As we progress through the instance over to the purple side in order to do a full clear, we're going to encounter a number of poles that are significantly easier than the orange side that we just did. Essentially, most people would come in purple side first because it's easier and the level progression works that way. I just happened to go orange this time for no particular reason. But packs like these slimes are pretty easy to deal with as long as you make sure not to stand in their puddles after they die. I mean, they're very, very easy to kite. They don't do any particular abilities aside from that puddle. And I'm going to skip showing the rest of purple because it's literally a joke. You know, there's undead centaurs that you can use your abilities on. That's about it. There's nothing special in terms of particular AoE pulls. It's just the same stuff you've been doing, but much easier. So we'll go a little deeper in, and really even the last part of the instance is also easy. The only hard part is orange. Everything on this last chunk of the instance is essentially, are you high enough level to be doing the content in the first place? As long as you can hit the mobs, odds are you shouldn't have too much trouble. You know, these mobs in particular have an AoE silence, so you don't put them on top of your healer. But since when are you ever putting mobs on top of your healer anyway? Basically, just keep doing what you already should know how to do at this point. There's a couple opportunities where you can try and get frisky, like I pulled this Pat into another group. And when you get to like the little snakes, you can pull 2 or 3 of those at a time, depending on their locations. But other than that, pretty straightforward dungeon. And rather than try and, you know, stretch this video out in order to make something out of nothing, I'm just going to cut this one a bit shorter than my usual ones. In the meantime, have a good one.